Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to Earwax. It's Colin, and today we're going to be going back to a series that really kind of inspired this whole channel. And we're doing it with a video that I was actually planning on doing at the end of last year and then delayed because I wanted to do it justice. And that is my top 5 albums of 1963. So, when I first started doing my top 5 of a given year series, my plan was to go all the way from like the modern era back to the 1950s. And I started with years ending in 3 because I had started with my top 5 albums of 2023, and it felt like just, a good kind of way to keep organized and stay on track to just go backwards in time with years ending in that number. But then I got to 1973, and I love 1973, one of my favorite years for music, and I started looking at albums from 1963. And what I realized was that there was maybe 5 albums total that I had listened to more than once, just across that entire year. So I didn't want to do a video that was just default of like the only albums that I really listened to, because let's be honest, it would have been Bob Dylan, the Beach Boys, the Beatles, Johnny Cash, and like that's pretty much it. A handful of other things here and there, but I didn't want it to just be that. Now, to be absolutely fair, those albums, or at least some of those albums, are definitely still on this list because, like any other of my top 5 lists, these are just my personal 5 favorites. But I wanted to give this year and really all of like the early 60s a fair shot. Now, that being said, what I also realized, I started looking into like 1953, and I just don't think I have the time to give the 50s the attention they deserve. I do listen to a lot of music from the 50s, but it's a lot of like, compilation music, some doo-wop here and there, and then like Screamin' Jay Hawkins, which is pretty much like the bulk of what I listened to from that time period. What I wanted to do for 1963 was listen to as many studio albums as I could and really like give that year a fair shot. And I will say, I was a little surprised by what I found. Now, I didn't listen to every single album that came out in 1963, at least studio album, but I feel like I listened to a good chunk of them. And there was a few of them that really kind of gripped me, and one artist in particular that I ended up just absolutely falling in love with, and we'll talk about them a little bit later. Real quick though, since it's been a while since we've done one of these videos, let's go over the rules one more time. So these are all going to be studio output albums, so no live albums, no compilation albums for the most part, no EPs, no singles, and they're all generally, I think, by one artist, or all of these are by like one artist. And normally in like other years, I would always try and stick to, original work. So I'd stray away from any sort of like cover albums. But that being said, just from the nature of music at this point in time, almost everyone had covers on their albums. So just kind of how the music industry worked at the time, for a couple reasons. Number one, studios wanted to make sure they were putting something out that people were going to listen to. So one of the ways that they would guarantee that was by ensuring there were songs on there that people knew, even if it was by a new artist. There's also like a big racial aspect of like why there are so many covers being done at this time. And I'm certainly not the best person to dive into that. There's plenty of great music historians out there that talk about that. And if you want to learn more, I highly recommend you go check it out. But I'm certainly not the best person to speak on that. That being said, almost all of these albums, I think all of these albums, have some covers on them, or have some, songs that weren't necessarily written by the people performing it. That wasn't as big of a thing until a little bit later into the 60s. Though I think there's some absolutely amazing albums on here, so let's get into the honorable mentions. But before we do that, if you could please like, comment, subscribe, all that stuff helps out my channel a ton. And without further ado, let's get into the list. So my first honorable mention is an album that like I kind of forced myself to listen to, and that's going to be Charles Mingus's The Black Saint and the Sinner Lady. So when I say I like forced myself to listen to this album, I'm not a big jazz guy. I do like jazz fusion. I like jazz in my hip hop. I like prog rock, or jazz rock, which can incorporate some of that stuff. But like, there's only a handful of jazz albums or artists that I've listened to like extensively in my years of listening to music. Miles Davis Bitches Brew is probably one of them, but that's also like one of the most famous biggest jazz albums of all time. And like when I first tried getting into jazz, that was the one I started with. And then like my other big experience listening to jazz, just being a huge nerd, is like the Cowboy Bebop soundtrack. But outside of that, like not a genre that I've dived super deep into. So there was a lot of albums released in 1963, again, just because of the time, that were jazz, and this is one that kept popping up. And so the first time I listened to it, I was like very intrigued because it was kind of like nothing I'd ever heard before, at least in the jazz world. By like my third or fourth listen, I was absolutely hooked. It's an amazing like avant-garde jazz piece. There's like some big band aspects of it. There's some bluesy aspects of it. The whole thing is kind of like composed and laid out as a ballet. And Charles Mingus famously was an upright bass player, and I feel like a lot of the really famous jazz musicians over the years were like horn players, brass, wind players, or like piano players. So it was cool to hear an album composed from like a bass player's point of view, and it's a really fun album. So if you're into more obscure like abstract music at all, even if you're not someone that's super into jazz, I definitely recommend giving this album a listen. Second honorable mention is going to be Sam Cooke's Night Beat. One thing that I really found off of my like deep dive into albums released in 63 was how much I really like Sam Cooke. Some original stuff on here, a lot more just kind of like, again, covers or songs that were written by other people, but his voice is absolutely amazing. He released 2 albums this year, and this is as good a soul R&B album as I've ever heard in my life. And then last honorable mention is going to be Miles Davis's Seven Steps to Heaven. Again, Miles Davis, one of the only real like jazz musicians that had spent any remote amount of time around, and it was almost always just Bitches Brew is like what I'd kind of come back to. But this was a fantastic album. Again, really just kind of highlighting why he's one of the most well-known and well-respected jazz musicians of all time. And again, I'm not like the biggest jazz fan, and I'm not going to try and speak on a genre that there are, again, people out there that know way more than me, but I really did enjoy my listening experience for this album. All right, with the honorable mentions out of the way, let's get into the top 5. And when So coming in at number 5 is going to be With the Beatles by the Beatles. Now, I love the Beatles, but when I choose to listen to them, it's almost always their late era stuff. I'm not a huge fan of like their first few albums, the more kind of like doo-wop pop stuff. I prefer the more like prog, rock and roll, like psych rock stuff that they would do later on in their career. That being said, there's some great tracks on this album. This was their second studio album and second album to come out this year. I do like this one better than their debut album. There are some great songs on here. I think there's like 8 or 9 songs that were written by the Beatles, and then of course they have some covers as well. But even their covers are really, really good. And in their early part of their career, I think this album definitely stands out because you see a lot of the creativity in their songwriting that they would expand on later on in their career with songs like It Won't Be Long, All My Lovin', and Don't Bother Me. But again, the covers here are really fun as well. And it's every now and then I do get in the mood to listen to some early Beatles, and this is generally the album that I will put on when that mood does strike. Coming in at number 4 is going to be Surfin' USA by the Beach Boys. Again, I think objectively there are some better albums that have come out this year, but this is probably the one that I'm the most familiar with. It's the one I've listened to the most consistently over my 30 plus years here on Earth. Obviously, you've got the title track of Surfin' USA, which is one of the most iconic surf rock songs ever written. But there's a lot of really great, like kind of, I'm not going to say B-sides, but like non-singles on this album as well. Specifically, Stoked and Lonely Sea are 2 of my absolute favorites. And yeah, I mean, like similar with the Beatles, like I prefer some of the Beach Boys like later stuff. I mean, stuff off like Pet Sounds, I think is them at their absolute peak. But their early stuff, like seeing just the roots of surf rock and like what would like it would end up becoming is really, really cool. One thing that I found when I was doing this deep dive into albums released in 1963, it's a lot of surf rock bands that were just releasing like the same versions of, or different versions of the same song, or like pretty much the same versions of the same song, and just recording it as they, kind of were asked to by their studio. So it is fun that the Beach Boys at least like approached that genre with a bit more originality than a lot of the contemporaries of that
Had
scene.
about a dozen babies. John Henry's pappy broke jail.
Coming in at number 3 is going to be Blood, Sweat, and Tears by Johnny Cash. Not my all-time favorite Johnny Cash album, but certainly one of his better ones and probably one of his like most well-known ones, at least of like this era of his career. A compilation of songs about like the working class, and definitely some great standouts on this album. The opening track of The Legend of John Henry's Hammer is absolutely incredible. It's a 9-minute kind of like epic that like is just a really cool song to like to listen to and get into the story behind. Tell 'Em I'm Gone, another great track. And yeah, I think this era of his career is some of his best work, and I absolutely love this album. It's you know, again, not like my all-time favorite Johnny Cash album, but it's definitely a fun one to throw on when you're in the mood for a little bit more of the grittier side to his music.
And it ain't no use in turning on your light, babe.
And my second favorite album from 1963 is Bob Dylan's The Free Will and Bob Dylan. I think Bob Dylan, arguably one of the greatest songwriters of all time. I don't think that's a contested like fact at this point in time. And his early like you know stuff is just something I really do genuinely enjoy listening to. You know, this album in particular. I know there's a lot of other albums of his that get talked about a lot, but this is one that I do find myself coming back to quite frequently. Blowing in the Wind, Don't Think Twice, It's All Right, Down the Highway. Like, there's just so many great tracks on this album. If you haven't listened to this album and you're into like classic 60s folk or, you know, classic rock just in general, like give it a listen. I know there's other Bob Dylan albums that are probably more quintessential to like his listening experience, but this is one of my absolute favorites and an easy number 2 spot for me.
I wish you love.
And my all-time favorite album from 1963 is Mr. Soul by Sam Cooke. Now, when I say I fell in love with Sam Cooke on my deep dive into albums released this year, I really fell in love. I've played this album since discovering it last year over a dozen times already, which is a lot for someone that listens to as many different albums as I do. And yeah, I mean, just his vocals on this album are incredible. This was, I think, his third to last album before he was, you know, very tragically murdered. But this was his second one to come out this year, first one to come out this year. I think Nightbeat was released after this. But yeah, I absolutely love this album. I think it's hands down one of the best soul R&B albums ever made. His performances on this are just absolutely incredible. It makes me feel things that I haven't felt in a very long time. His renditions here of I Wish You Love, Cry Me a River, Chains of Love, like it's such a heartbreakingly beautiful album. And yeah, I mean, definitely not one that I've listened to as much as the other 4 on my top 5 list because I just discovered it recently. But oh my God, is it not just absolutely incredible? I don't know what I was doing for the past, you know, 30 plus years of my life with not having this not be in it, because I now could not imagine a time when I didn't have this album to listen to. It's just so good. So if you haven't listened to it yet, go listen to it. It's soulful, it's beautiful, it'll make you cry at parts. It's a gorgeous, gorgeous album, and one that I'm very grateful I discovered based off this journey.
You and I will never be.
So that's it for my top 5 albums of 1963. Like I said earlier, I don't know if I'm going to do the 50s at this point. Maybe I'll do like a top 5 of the 50s in general. I feel like that'll be a more honest video that I come out with, and we'll see like when eventually I do get around to that. I will be doing a top 5 in 1964 soon, and then I'll probably go back to you know, 2022, I think, and try and go through everything from years ending in 2 before the end of the year, and then I'll start next year with 2025, so this year, and then go backwards from there. Thanks for everyone that's been watching. If you've watched a lot of my videos up until this point, I really appreciate you guys, and I'm gonna keep doing this till I get tired or run out of topics. So thanks so much again, guys, and as always, I will talk to y'all later. Peace.